With free agency opening up tonight, we have some major updates. Apparently, it's a lock that Fred VanVleet will be a Houston Rocket by the end of the day, and there will be league-wide shock if he doesn't have a verbal agreement. So we'll break that down, and a potential replacement for the Toronto Raptors. Apparently, they're looking at Gabe Vincent. So lots of stuff happening at the point guard position. Additionally, we have an update regarding Jakob, Poeltl, and the trade situations involving Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. So lots of madness, Ryker. We got a last-minute update. So let's dive in the first topic, and the first thing we're taking a look at is Fred VanVleet likely being a Houston Rocket. Now, this has dominated Raptors discussion as of late. Fred VanVleet, where's he gonna go? Where's he gonna be? Well, Mark Stein's coming out and basically saying that it's gotten to a point where there will be legitimate league-wide surprise. Now, if Fred VanVleet and Canadian Dylan Brooks don't strike a verbal agreement to join the Houston Rockets by Friday night. So by tonight, Ryker, as covered in the cyberspace on Wednesday, it's expected that Fred VanVleet will receive a 2-year, $83 million contract, Ryker, roughly $42 million per season. I made a rant about it the other day. What are your thoughts on this contract, him going to Houston, that craziness that seems like it's going to go down tonight?
Well, we spent a bit of time with Fred VanVleet a couple of years back, not one-on-one, but we were there. We were in the scrum doing media for a shoe drop. What was this guy all about? The moolah, Ben. And you got to let him walk. For that amount of money, you can't handcuff the team. Even on a short-term contract, 2 years only, that's not very standard, really, for NBA players that are at that starting level caliber. They want to cash out, make sure that they're protected in case there's injuries or downturn. They want to make the most amount of money. So there could be an argument as a Raptors fan that you give the bag for 2 years, at least you've secured that point guard position. But Ben, the woes that we've had with Fred VanVleet over the past couple of years, it's like we're stagnant and in a decline. I don't see much improvement with Fred VanVleet at the helm. I know that there's not necessarily an immediate replacement. You're going to talk about some prospects that are potentially lined up, but reality is you got to let him walk if he's getting that money. You're not matching that if you're the Toronto Raptors front office.
Well, Ryker, in this past year, I've apparently become the Fred VanVleet fanboy, as I don't think he's trash. I don't think he's garbage. I don't think he's horrific and we shouldn't bring him back or anything like that. But at that $40 million number, I don't care if one season, maybe I get away with it, but 2 years when we have Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and now Gary Trent Jr. going to be free agents after this season, right? We have a lot of sort of decisions to make regarding cap flexibility. Scotty Barnes' extension will probably be eligible, after next year after his third season, so he'll be looking for some bags. Fred VanVleet commanding $42 million, and maybe the Raptors could offer a longer-term deal, but with something lower, but we've been saying it, right? Like $30 million feels like a lot for Fred VanVleet, who, yes, he's solid, and if we pull up his stats, I believe these are his stats going to be popping up, right? Like 19 points per game, 4 rebounds, 7 assists, but 34% from the behind the three-point line, under 40% from the field, and sure, he gets a few steals per night, but he was getting burned left, right, and center by smaller, quick guards, and those are the players that he used to be able to lock down, and he's a step slower on that defensive end, and if we, $42 million, basically the max money for 2 seasons would be ridiculous in its own right, but even at a reduced rate for a longer-term deal, that's almost worse, because then you're sort of locked into the risk that, the defense doesn't come back. He can't really adjust to a developing Scotty Barnes. It wasn't just Nick Nurse giving him the ISO offense and he'll fit into this new system. I think we're on the same page about this one right here, Ryker.
I try to pick sometimes the contradictory opinion to you just so I'll have a little bit to argue back on, but this is resounding agreement here, Ben. Fred VanVleet, league leader in deflections. There's defensive stats that go to Fred VanVleet's benefit, but the reality is just hasn't got done when he's looked at as first secondary option and teams are attacking him, particularly in a league last couple of years where teams are not shy to go in a bunch of high screens to make sure that they get that good mismatch. Fred VanVleet, he's been a bit of a liability. Now, obviously, I was very out of the loop in the last season, so I'm talking mostly on, the rest of the years that I've spent watching Fred VanVleet. But if there's an opportunity to even just do away with the point guard position for a year, run a bit of a bigger ball lineup, give guys like Scotty Barnes the opportunity to be a primary ball handler, could be to the benefit of the Toronto Raptors. But Ben, who are we eyeing up?
Who
as
are we
potential
eyeing up,
replacement?
Ryker?
That's the question.
You're saying do away with the point guard position. Well, Masai Ujiri potentially isn't. The Raptors are potentially targeting Gabe Vincent as a replacement for Fred VanVleet. As news basically came out from Jake Fisher to say, keep an eye on Toronto for providing Gabe Vincent with a landing spot if Fred VanVleet ultimately departs from the Toronto Raptors. Now, who the heck is Gabe Vincent, and why is he in the conversation for the Toronto Raptors point guard spot? Well, just like Fred VanVleet, he was an understudy to Kyle Lowry. Gabe Vincent is the same sort of guy over there with the Miami Heat. In fact, he ended up taking Kyle Lowry's starting spot during this, glory 8th seed playoff run that they've had this year. And look at his stats. You look at them and you might say, hey, they're not too crazy there for Gabe Vincent. 9 points per game, 2 rebounds, 2.5 assists. 33% from behind the three-point line, so that's a little bit rough there. You're not getting the same steals as Fred, but again, a sound defender, kind of one of those guys that come in and just a really solid role player off the bench for the Heat, and then had some really big moments for Miami, right? Knocking down some big shots, right? The three-point jump shot, regardless of the percentages, it looks fluid. Might have some of that Terrence Ross-esque, I know he's your favorite player, Ryker, but where the jump shot looks really smooth, but the percentages aren't that immaculate. But Gabe Vincent could come in, and I don't know if you want him to be your long-term starting point guard, but if we sort of open up that mid-level, depending on what we do with Otto Porter Jr., right, bring him in for a contract that, what's a quarter of Fred VanVleet potentially, that's a lot more encouraging than, giving Fred VanVleet $100 million over 2 years or close to it.
Maybe Gabe Vincent's ready to take that step, Ben. Who knows? Maybe he's TJ Warren 1 year, good playoffs, and then he's going to completely disappear. There's always that risk when you take a gamble on a guy who was on a good team, had a good playoff run, had a couple of big games. You look at his game by game stats throughout the most recent playoffs, and he showed up big in a couple of games against Milwaukee, which is a great defensive team. He had early on a couple of good games against New York, so he's memorable, right? You remember him doing good in the playoffs, but part of that has to be attributed to just how hot the rest of the team was when Strus and Martin and Butler and minimally Adebayo, but all the rest of the guys are rolling. It's a little bit easier to get your shots and have confidence in your shots too. But Ben, I came back. We know CPA, so I have to be a little bit more stat oriented now. I've got things like height. Vincent wins that. I'm trying to get some things because obviously we go into shooting stats. You don't have to go into many numbers to see Fred VanVleet is better. He's a better scorer. He's a better shooter, right? But height, I'm going to give the edge to Vincent here. Contract, I'm going to give the edge to Vincent. Those were the only two things in my prelim research. That was definitive plus. That's my CPA analysis, man.
Let's go. We'll get some stats rolling. We'll get a segment rolling for Ryker stats. He's got the height and he's cheaper, so he can come in and, as you said, maybe take the leap. And we've heard Kyle Lowry rave about this man, about his work ethic, his mentality, his ability to come in and be a starting caliber guard for whatever team he ends up being on. So be cool to have another Kyle Lowry understudy. And regardless of what you want to say about Fred VanVleet, whether he stays, whether he goes, it seems like he's going to the Houston Rockets. He was a huge success with the Toronto Raptors. I mean, we won a chip with him. He was remarkable in that finals run. He's had some amazing moments with this team. So, another Lowry understudy. I'm not sure if Gabe Vincent was undrafted or not, but would be a cool story to potentially come in and fit that Toronto Raptors narrative. But again, don't expect the level of Fred VanVleet production from Gabe Vincent if he's coming in here to be that starting guard. And I know people are down on Fred VanVleet at this point, but he was an all-star 2 seasons ago. People hate it when I bring that up. He's still a good basketball player, guys. So
he's a champion.
Yeah.
He's in that small circle of people who can tote that, and a significant contributor on that championship roster team, and clamped. I'm going to say clamped. People might debate this. Steph Curry in that finals matchup. So
without a doubt, clamped Steph Curry there. There's I'd be bringing that up. People are not on the Fred VanVleet bandwagon right now, Ryker. So we're gonna be getting bashed in the comment section for even speaking good on him. But wishing the best for Fred VanVleet. We'll see what ends up happening tonight, but a lot of money's probably going to be thrown his way. But another guy that could potentially be back, or it's looking like he'll likely be back, is Jakob Poeltl, likely returning to the Toronto Raptors. Now, yesterday we heard a report from Michael Grange talking about the Spurs, and, that's its own situation. But basically, Mark Stein came out with a different view, with a different set of sources that he's been hearing, basically saying that NBA, well, in his article, it's a paywalled article, so couldn't get the screenshots, but you look at the excerpts and saying that the league-wide expectations, while they're, executives, people in front offices see Fred VanVleet as good as gone for the Toronto Raptors at this point, Jakob Poeltl will likely return on a deal that's similar to what Nikola Vucevic received from the Chicago Bulls. You're $20 million annually. Vucevic received a 3-year, $20 million per year contract, so I'd be happy with that coming back for Jakob Poeltl. Yes, he can shoot free throws. Yes, he's not floor spacing or anything like that. It's tough to play him at the end of games. We saw it for a few games closing out last season where you get hacked down the stretch as a 3-point game. You could really use a couple points, and he's selling them at the free throw line, but he brings a lot to our squad on the defensive end. We need a center. Positionally, he's sound. He's amazing at rolling to the basket, finishing around the bucket. He's a center that we have, and we also have the sort of personnel to run a small ball unit to close games if he doesn't really fit. But do you think $20 million is a good amount of money there for Jakob Poeltl, Ryker, or overpay, underpay? Is it a steal? How you feeling about Poeltl potentially returning on that money?
You got to pay. Yeah. You got to pay. You can make the argument that the league is shifting to the small ball league, and that's not necessarily a lie, but there's enough teams with big centers, big imposing, lumbering centers down the lane that you need one guy who can match up or you're going to be toast, right? That's the 76ers matchup and all of these. So there's a couple of series where no matter what, you need an equivalently large big man. And when Jakob Poeltl came to the Raptors, immediately he's getting 10, 12, 15 rebounds per game. I saw that much. I saw 4 or 5 games in, he got a 30 piece and then a 21 piece, right? He put up some serious rim rolling, good finish, good touch numbers. And there's not a lot of guys at that center position that we were running pre-Yak that had consistently good rebounding, right? There's guys when they put that effort in on that side, Precious and I don't even remember the Kem Birch. Who else were we running at that center
baby.
position?
We acquired old Jakob Poeltl for Kem, but we don't have that deep of a front court here at this point.
Yeah, Precious Achua, Chris Boucher. These are the rest of the guys. They'll get you rebounds, but it's not because they are overpowering the other centers that they're matching up down the block. So you need a guy like this. I think Yak fits the mold. I'd pay him a bit of money to keep him around.
Yeah, $20 million here. You're not going to go wrong with a big man at that position. If it's not working out, you're struggling, your team is really cut down by the lack of free throw shooting late in the game, that's going to be a movable contract. People will be interested in Jakob Poeltl, but again, he provided a lot of value to the squad. $20 million a year for Jakob Poeltl is worth it, and it saves me from the Spurs once again fleecing the Toronto Raptors, because that would be just a horrific look. But the final thing we're discussing is the NBA still targeting Raptors stars via trade, Ryker, but this has been the main talking point. Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby. What's going to happen with these Toronto Raptors stars? It's been nonstop since the NBA trade deadline. Well, apparently there's a notion that's carried over into the offseason. What happened at the trade deadline is Toronto is still not ready to give up and go through some sort of rebuild, sources say. Rival teams have continued to contact the Raptors about trades focused on both Siakam and OG Anunoby, though Toronto is asking for a king's ransom in return. So, as one league source put it, telling clutch points there, Ryker, what's your king's ransom? What would you want in return for either a Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby?
More than this. A little bit more than that. Ben, I think at some point, who's driving the narrative?
That was a snake.
It was just $2 signs, Ben. That's at least a $3 sign.
We need Kobe back.
It's at least a $3 sign return. You can see it's slow getting back into the rhythm of reporting on the Toronto Raptors here. But Ben, bear with me here. Who's driving the narrative of OG always being on the trade block? Is it his own camp, or are we just continually circulating the narrative because we're going to drive this poor guy crazy by putting his name out there all the time, right? I maybe I made a dig in the last video at OG, but the reality is he's probably one of the best two-way players on the Toronto Raptors, has been consistently since he's been drafted. He is that invaluable piece, and if we make a trade like some of the other teams that have got pretty minimal in return for their star players, just because they need to make the shift, they need to make the move, they don't see themselves improving current roster, whatever have you, you could put some of those titles to the Toronto Raptors to get back less than starting perhaps all-star caliber guy for OG would be very disappointing as a fan.
Yeah. That King's ransom better be Scoot Henderson, better be Anthony Simons attached to it, better be some future first-round picks. That's what I'm looking for OG Anunoby if there's ever going to be a deal.
Whoa, Tyus Jones in a second isn't enough for you?
Okay, get out of here, sir. Get out of here with that madness. Jordan Poole, bring it in for OG. Silliness on that front there. But folks, you guys are best for making this far. Hit that subscribe button. We're going to be covering everything. Hopefully going live tonight for the NBA free agency period that's going to be going on. We'll probably see Fred VanVleet potentially being a Rocket. Lots of madness happening. But Ryker, you have any last words on all the Toronto Raptors potential moves?
It's all about that money, baby. Cheers.
Let's go.